There are mornings when you wake up and recognize your life, but you do not quite recognize yourself. You slept, but you do not feel restored. You're surrounded by people that you love, but everything feels slightly irritating. You walk into a room and cannot remember why you went there. Your motivation has disappeared. Your body feels heavier. Your mind feels less sharp. And somewhere along the way, you begin to wonder, what is happening to me? Maybe someone tells you it's probably your hormones. And while that might be true, it's also incomplete because your hormones are not operating independently. They're in a constant conversation with your brain. You see, your brain influences when hormones are released, how strongly they're released, and when the message should stop. And your hormones travel back to the brain, affecting how you think, how you sleep, how you respond to stress, how motivated you feel, and even how safe the world seems. And this is not a one way announcement, it's a continuous exchange. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Neuro Collective podcast and our series in the hidden conversations, those conversations that take place inside your body every moment of every day. So today we're having a conversation here in the studio with Doc about the hidden conversation between your brain and your hormones. And I know this is a hot topic for women, men too, but being one of those women, I really can't wait for this conversation. So, hey Doc, how you doing?
Good. Literally a hot topic for ladies. Hot, 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 like hot flashes, right?
Yes, totally. So let's talk about hormones as messengers, right? Because I know hormones get a bad rap in midlife. They get a bad rap in puberty and then again in midlife, right? But they obviously serve a purpose. And, there's transitions in a woman's life, in her younger years and in her middle years. But we want to consider hormones as messengers, right? And especially when we're having this conversation about hidden connections or hidden conversations between the brain and the rest of the body, today's focus is all about hormones. So let's talk about that.
Okay, let's talk about that. What do you want to talk about? Hormones in the brain. Okay. Well,
Yeah,
I think probably the foundation of it is to talk about where are the glands that secrete these hormones that are these messengers,
good
right?
point.
So
Yes.
we'll start in the top up here. And what most people might think is the pituitary. We would agree. We call that the master hormone gland. But there's actually a smaller gland that actually controls the pituitary called the hypothalamus.
Hmm.
Hypothalamus. So you have the hypothalamus, then you have the pituitary. And that's generating a lot of different signals to go to other glands down in your body to tell it to release things. So how does the hypothalamus and pituitary know to talk to each other to send information downstream? Because they're
Yeah.
getting feedback, right? The hypothalamus is kind of like, I've heard this before actually in scientific research discussions, if you will, or clinical discussions, I should say, where they talk about it's almost like a vampire. What does that mean? It has
Mm,
it has a very thin layer of capillary structures going through the hypothalamus, the
okay.
hypothalamic structure. So the blood is being filtered a bit by the hypothalamus through these capillaries and is picking up chemistry in your blood. And so that's chemistry, whether it's coming from stress hormones, whether it's coming from glucocorticoids like your blood sugar and hunger and things, whether it's coming from sodium, potassium, minerals, which might be affected by thirst and by your kidneys, or whether it's coming from your sex hormones, right? So
Hmm.
whether you're low or you're high or you're out of balance, it's picking up that kind of like almost like a thermostat or like a little vampire, right? And then it's
Interesting.
telling that pituitary, hey, we better do something because there's not enough thyroid in the system. So it's going to send a signal to the thyroid from the pituitary. So that would be the next gland, the thyroid, right in this area here, right? Hypothalamus, pituitary, thyroid.
I've also heard the hypothalamus also could be considered like the translator, right? Between the glands or the hormones and the brain, right? So
Yeah, I
translating
like
that
that.
information, right? So, okay,
Yeah.
go ahead.
So the hypothalamus, as it's going to tell the pituitary what to do, the hypothalamus is really kind of like a translator, a thermostat. So
Hmm.
it's going to control things like hunger and thirst from the brain.
Yes.
Because someone might be listening and they're really smart and they say, well, what about ghrelin and these other leptins and these signaling from the gut? I say, you're right. You're correct. Those are the ones that are going to come through that blood and it's going to be picked up by the hypothalamus. But
Yes.
today we're focusing on the hypothalamus, right? And
Yeah.
the other glands and hormones. So hunger and thirst, libido, whether you have that energy for intimacy with your partner, hunger, thirst, sleep, and then, of course, your stress regulation hormones,
Mm.
temperature regulation also. There you
Mhm.
go. And there's
Mhm.
actually a commercial that you and I saw about a newer medication for women with hot flashes. And I think it says, hot flash, not flash, hot flash,
Yeah,
something like that in the commercial.
right.
But what it was saying, pardon me, is that this hot flash, it said something to this degree that it was something that affects the brain. They even
Yes.
mentioned that in the
Yes.
commercial, right?
Yes. We
So
both
we
caught
were
that.
like, whoa, that's actually very accurate. I'm glad they're saying that and
Yep.
they're paying some attention or giving people the thought. This is occurring upstream.
Yes.
So that hypothalamus is doing all that work. Pituitary sends out so many different preliminary hormone messengers. You talked about messengers. So brain, thyroid. Then we have the thymus gland here. So
Mhm.
it's underneath the sternum. That has to do with your immune system. We're
Mhm.
going to keep coming down midline, right? We're going to come down to the pancreas, blood sugar right under your ribs here in the middle, right under that curvature. Going to
Right.
come down a little further and go back towards the kidneys. You have your adrenal glands on both sides. So your adrenals secrete hormones for stress, and they secrete some small amounts of sex hormones for men and women. So
Mhm.
where I have estrogen in my body, it's coming from the breakdown of testosterone and from my adrenal glands. Where you have testosterone in your body is coming from primarily the breakdown of estrogen and from the adrenal glands. So as you get into menopause, if the adrenal glands are shot from stress for so many years, you don't
Mhm.
have the reserves and you can feel super depleted.
Yes.
You don't have the reserves of the testosterone you need even as a woman.
Right.
And it's going to support even the estrogen levels, which you know better than I. So we go down from this towards the back. We go down into the pelvic area, right? The loins here. We have the gonads for the men, testicles and the gonads, and a woman has her ovaries. So that's your kind of series of hormone, glandular function, starting at the brain, signaling down to all of those different glands as they secrete things into the bloodstream. The bloodstream is passing through the regulatory center, even in the hypothalamic capillary system, and siphoning it out or translating the information saying, hey, increase, hey, don't release right now. We have enough. We're good. So it's a feedback loop. So the
Right.
brain, when it becomes dysregulated for many different reasons, we often talk about concussion. We
Right.
talk about inflammation or neuroinflammation, and we talk about immune issues, which are also inflammatory.
Mhm.
Those types of things can dysregulate hormone systems. And now I'm going to stop.
That's a lot, doc, but thank you. It's like a whole I was picturing, visually the endocrine system, as you're going down. And the thing that strikes me, which of course we've had these conversations on the Neuro Collective and will continue to, is how nervous system dysregulation affects the hormones. And of course, it has to,
Yes.
right? Because this translator, right, is trying to translate what's happening in the system, in the nervous system, but there's so much going on, right? Let's say a woman is under an enormous amount of mental, emotional stress, maybe physical stress too, but mostly modern stress is mental, emotional, right? Self
Right.
imposed mostly. And then what if she's also under dietary stress or insulin resistance experience
Right.
because of dietary choices, right? And eating things that are affecting how her pancreas regulates the insulin in her body, right? Insulin acts as a hormone as well in the body. So these are two main modern issues, right? That we as women in midlife and any season, but let's say midlife, need to be monitoring, right? And as an integrative health practitioner, one of the things that we go after with my coaching clients is, well, number one, nervous system regulation, because we need to create
Right.
a calm body and create a sense of calm in the system, but also is looking at dietary approaches so that our goal is to create a better balance of how your body produces and utilizes insulin, because that affects everything else, right? It affects your
Yes.
sleep, it affects your wake and sleep cycle. It affects your stress. It affects all sorts of things. So it brings to mind those two modern day issues, right? Too much cortisol, too much insulin, which is then creating a problem for the rest of the hormones as well. So
Yes.
that poor
Right.
hypothalamus, I imagining that poor hypothalamus being like a translator at the UN, trying to translate all these foreign languages at the same time. I think that this translator is going to be pretty fatigued and not be able to function in his or her best capacity when they're having to translate many foreign languages at the same time, almost
Yeah.
impossible.
I think that that's well said actually, because it's a different way to think about it. Like if you've gotten to a point, a listener here has gotten to a point or a viewer where they have had a lot of dysregulation in their metabolism,
Yes.
and that has their hormones as well. Maybe they're very overweight, moderate to very overweight. So they're changing their hormonal signaling system, right? Maybe their brain is under a lot of stress, just mentally, and so that can cause dysregulation in the hormones. So it can come from the bottom up in a feedback, right? Someone may have ovarian cysts, and that may be from a metabolic syndrome, right?
Yep.
Or a male may have low T, like we see in a lot of former military
Low
because there's
testosterone. Yeah.
injury to the brain, which affects their testosterone levels.
Hmm.
That's another conversation. Or we might go the blood sugar handling, which you just mentioned, or stress over periods of time when you're teenagers. Now your adrenals become somewhat fatigued or depleted, might be the better word. If we go up to the thymus, immune hit one after the other, ear infections as a child, mono and strep as a young person. Maybe they ended up with COVID or the vaccine that might have created an issue for them, other vaccines, different things affecting their immune system now affecting their thymus, right?
Yes.
So as we go through these different systems and their thyroid, right? We have exposure to things in the water. We have things that knock off the iodine from our system. So we're maybe iodine depleted because of fluorides and things like this. Now, some people are more sensitive than others, and especially in certain municipalities where the water is not really adjusted properly all the time. And it's got too much chlorine, which affects them as well. So there's a lot of things that can affect from the body. And then the signaling back is stressing the system, or the brain itself is under too much stress.
Hmm.
What kind of stress? Well, as you mentioned, mental, psychological, emotional. I'm going to put that all in one bucket. And then I'm going to say technological stress, which is also a bit mental because we're constantly in dealing with technology. And I
Hmm.
know how I feel at 62 when I'm dealing with new technology. It's a bit stressful to learn it and to understand it and then to deal with technical problems and glitches. So it stresses me. But
Sure.
also we see a lot of young people, as you know, with ADHD and are on the spectrum,
Hmm.
and some with different anxiety and depression and OCD. Now, people in this grouping, this category, may not know how to regulate their nervous system very well,
Hmm.
right? Which you mentioned also. And so their nervous system they don't know how to calm themselves. They don't
Right.
know how to cope in the way where I can take a down step in where I'm feeling, and so they're learning that maybe, or maybe they're not because their nervous system's so out of balance. So consequently, their hormone system is also going to take the brunt of that as they're going through the aging process.
Yeah.
So learning to re-regulate the nervous system is really crucial
Hmm.
because it will help their hormonal balance. Understanding it and adjusting functional medicine approaches as you do with your clients to regulate the metabolic feedback to the brain helps to re-regulate the hormonal system.
Yes.
And these take time. The quick fixes are drugs, and
Right.
the long-term lifestyle fixes they're more sustainable. They're more
Right.
sustainable and they're
Right.
healthier, right? So these are two different ways to consider it, but the brain is always having a conversation with our hormones.
Yeah, absolutely. And in this modern time, there's so many approaches to hormones, right? And just like pharmaceuticals, right? There is bioidenticals, there's HRT, there's all the different things that is possible to
Right.
adjust the hormone levels. And, we're okay if that's, I mean, we have a conversation about that with our clients if that's something that's needed. But it's not the first thing that we go to, right? Because
Right.
if you were to adjust the hormones in an individual, but you don't adjust the lifestyle interventions, then you're really doing very little to make a huge splash in how the brain and the body converse with each other. You're adjusting a small, tiny component, and the person might feel better for a short period, right? Because, of course, you have an influx of hormones, you have an influx of something that they were depleted in. So, initially, they may feel some reprieve and some relief. But if we don't adjust the lifestyle pieces, then we're just in this cycle, just like pharmaceuticals. We're just dealing with the final symptom of what the body's conversation said, right? Versus dealing with, well, what's going on in the background that's affecting this outcome, right? These symptoms in the first place.
Right.
So, having an understanding of that background conversation, that's what we're after here, right? The hidden conversations is what we want to teach you and what we want you to be mindful of, and to help you be more mindful of how you take care of these things for yourself. And,
Yes.
there are so many things, as you were, right, going down the list of all the possibilities of
As I was rattling on, is that what you said?
about. And the way we would say it is and that's why the de-stress protocol that we utilize metabolically for our
Absolutely.
patients is so vital and so good, because we take you through de-stressing your nervous system, your hormone system, your sleep system, right? We de-stress the body in multiple
Yes.
different ways, and we take time to do that, right? And, as I like to say, there's an order of operations to things, and we take our time. And this is how we remove the stress and the anxiety away from how do we handle all the different things that the world says is a problem to my biological health? Well, we do it one step at a time. And we do it
Yeah.
in the proper order so that you're pulling the biggest levers first, right?
Good.
You're pulling the biggest levers first, and then all the other ones, they're important, but they're not the biggest lever that you wanna pull first. Because when you work with the bigger pieces, then by default, other things start to improve. Other aspects of your health will improve as you work in this order. So, even working with hormones, I have a client right now who came to me maybe about 8 weeks ago, 9 weeks ago now, and she said, "I really don't wanna go on hormone replacement therapy," but she had all the classic signs of being, a menopausal woman: weight gain, sleep, energy in the toilet, right? Just a lot of fatigue and cravings and all the things. She also didn't want to go into any GLP-1 therapy. Not that she's fully against it, but she really had her mind correct. She wanted to fix all the issues that she's dealing with, the lifestyle pieces, and she knew she needed the accountability and coaching and a practitioner like myself to guide her. So we've been going through the de-stress protocol, and it's been about 8 weeks. So we've gone through all of the major components thus far. She's very coachable. She's done all the pieces as I've guided her, and she is feeling remarkably better, remarkably better. And we've done nothing but change her lifestyle components. That's basically what we've done, or mostly what we've done. And just recently, we've added supplementation after doing some lab work and looking at where her deficiencies are and supporting her hormone structure, right? Abilities to generate hormones, right? So supporting it, not giving her hormones, but giving her nutrients. But before we could do that, we had to lay down the foundation of nervous system regulation first. Because if her cortisol was sky high, if her insulin was all over the map, we could do the supplements, but we're still doing the supplements with very little net effect if everything
Yeah.
else is not being balanced, right? So I bring her up because she's a classic example of someone who follows the coaching, she implements it, and she's tasting the fruit of her labor. And also, just want to add one more thing. Talking about stress, she was just in our last session. She was going through some family stress, and very difficult. She got teary eyed sharing it with me, so I knew it was just like really up here, right? As I like to say, like the emotions are right here. And so she said, but what interesting about what's happening for me now is that ordinarily, when I'm under this level of stress, I just raid the kitchen. Right. I'm a stress eater. I'll go after whatever. And I want to go for my comfort food, and I do all of that. She says, but I didn't do that this time. She says it was an opposite reaction this time. She says, I chose not to eat while I was under that heavy period of stress. I drank water, I drank tea, and then the rest of the day I ate something comforting, but I took a couple of bites. I didn't eat the whole thing. And then I set my mind to reset myself the next day. And I said, wow, that is exactly what we want to be able to do under stressful situations, right?
Yeah.
Is to be able
Very
to
good.
manage the stress, go through it, but don't go into, the habits that got us into, the poor state of health that we were once in. So
Right.
I just want to share that in the conversation of estrogen, not estrogen, but just all the hormones and the brain conversation, because her brain and her body are speaking a new language.
Yeah.
And they're
Great.
speaking a new language because she's implemented the proper things to support that.
Brilliant. I love it. Just fantastic. And you mentioned estrogen there for a moment. We were talking about the hypothalamus having this conversation with the rest of your body and your
Mhm.
brain, part of your brain. But I did not mention that there are other areas in your brain that have receptors for different hormones. So
Right.
there are estrogen receptors in the brain, which affect things like the hippocampus here in the temporal lobe, the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, even several neurotransmitter systems they affect, just like testosterone would affect neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin. So, optimizing these hormones is a very smart thing to do when it's appropriate,
Mhm.
as we're working on lifestyle pieces for some people, because we know that estrogen being too low has a inflammatory effect in women in their brain later in
Right.
life, which we don't want. And these receptors will go without the proper activation. Cortisol receptors in the brain also. So when cortisol is high, there's a large density of cortisol receptors in the temporal lobes, which I just mentioned, and it
Good
affects
point.
memory.
Yeah.
So those are just two of the areas, hormones with receptors in the brain. Many others will affect the brain, thyroid receptors in the brain, and you can feel the difference. So what they miss is that the brain is part of the hormone picture, right?
Yeah.
It's part of it. So they miss that they are not getting enough restorative sleep. They miss that they're not really having the stable dark to light patterns in their life that they really need. They may be missing that they're receiving constant threat signals. So their brain is feeling and body that they're not safe, as you would say. And
Mhm.
so these things, the brain is not separate from the endocrine system. It helps to shape the hormonal system and vice versa. And I would say the hormonal system stabilizes the brain environment and the brain shapes the hormonal environment. How about that? We can say it that
Right.
way.
Right.
That's the hidden conversation. That's the one that we focus on with our clients, and I know you do with yours.
Mhm. Mhm. So in functional neurology, right? So let's talk about and we've talked about it already a little bit, but the functional neurology perspective, we don't assume that every hormonal symptom begins in the brain, but we also know that it's multifaceted to your point, right? So we need to look at the brain function or dysfunction as it might be, and then also what's happening metabolically so that we can
Sure.
apply both strategies, right? We can apply a metabolic strategy like the de stress protocol, and then we can apply a neurological strategy like what we did for myself this morning. We just did a training this morning, the vestibular and visual system on me personally. And just a little side note, I came into the clinic feeling very fatigued, eyes very heavy. I have a
Mhm.
background of vestibular dysfunction. And so we did the evaluation, full evaluation today, which we had not had the chance to do yet, and then did some vestibular training. And
Right.
wow, what a significant difference in just one training session. I know we have more to come, but already feeling that strength come back in my overall system, right? So, yeah, so that's me in the chair earlier, just a couple hours ago and doing that training. And so powerful, so incredibly powerful from before and after how I felt when I got in the chair, how I was feeling, and then how
Right.
I felt afterwards. And still, I mean, obviously I look fine, don't I?
Well,
But
we had an interesting conversation this morning, just to jump in, because I'm older. I use bioidentical hormones, so that helps me optimize my level of recovery and so forth. But we were mentioning, you and I, in the last 2 days, like, well, what could this be? Heart palpitations. You had some discomfort in your left frontal area over the weekend when we walked.
yes,
And so we're monitoring different signs. Your fatigue was extreme and got worse. And I think we even I know that we said maybe the hormones, we need to do a little look again at where your hormones are, because that's important for you.
right,
So, and then here we come in and we look at the vestibular system and it's extremely low. We activate it and you come right up. No harm. Did it change? Did we give you hormones? No. Is it affecting your hormone system? Well, we could say, hypothetically it is, but what we did is you have to find where the imbalance is. That's what you're talking about. What's
yep,
the functional neurology approach? Analyze the brain,
yep,
find out where there are imbalances, analyze the labs, find out where there are imbalances,
right,
analyze the cortex here. So we're not going to say, oh, the cortex has brain waves too high, too much alpha or too much beta. That must be cortisol. No, it doesn't work that way. But yet we take all of the data points And then we understand from your history very carefully and detailed, what are you presenting with? What are you experiencing? And now we can start to fit the proper things together and understand the direction to go. Right.
Mhm. I love that, yeah. It's just a couple of practical things, you and I keep a lot of data on our clients and then on ourselves, right? So, but if you're listening or watching this and this is not who you are, you're not necessarily a researcher at heart, but become a little interested and a little curious and a bit of a researcher for yourself. Because as you're listening to these conversations that we're having about the hidden conversations, there are things that you can become a bit more of a detective for yourself because
Yes.
oftentimes people will say, well, I feel bad, I feel this, but how often do we write down what's actually happening? So here's an idea for you, especially if you're dealing with, what you suspect is brain hormone issues. So think of it as your brain hormone conversation log. Okay.
Yes.
So
Good.
I want you to each evening record 5 things. Okay. Or for each evening. So maybe the next morning, how you slept, how clear you felt your thinking was during the day, how steady you felt your energy was, how reactive or calm you felt,
Mm.
right? And what was happening in your body or environment that those things, when those things changed, right? So, because a lot of times we don't put two and two together, right? Did I have a argument or a little riff or difficulty with a person, then I felt off? Was it a meal maybe that caused me to feel off, right? So sometimes we don't put two and two together. And this blog isn't for you to be judgmental or criticize yourself, right? It's really mostly to become more curious. To begin to see, cause and effect, because there, like we said earlier, there are lifestyle components. And when you want to de stress your nervous system and de stress your body in general, then these are things that you want to pay attention to. So, just a little help there if you want to be a little of a detective for yourself and start to connect the dots a little bit.
I like that. How you slept. I'm just looking at your notes. How
Yeah.
you slept, how clearly your thinking felt,
Hmm.
how steady your energy was, how reactive or calm you felt, what was happening in your body or the environment when those things changed. Don't criticize yourself. Become curious. I love that. You had like the best notes here. So very good. There's a couple of things to be thinking about as we
Well,
wrap
just
this
some
up.
takeaways, because I like to be very practical and I like to be okay. There's a lot of science and a lot of understanding that we can go really deep, but what can you walk away with? What is something that you can help yourself become a little bit more curious? And then at the end of it, create more agency, which I talk a lot about on this podcast. Having agency is, in my view, knowing what to do and how to do it, right? And knowing what to do needs a foundational understanding of yourself. And the curiosity to put those things together. So we're
Very good.
here. If this is something that is interesting to you and you're listening to this conversation and thinking, yeah, I think my brain is having some hidden conversations that need to be addressed, then, we would start with a brain health audit with you. And we're here to answer those questions and give you some feedback to see if this work is something that would be the next right step, for you. I can say that for me today, I feel amazing. Just that one training session, pretty powerful. So I'm going to be a strong advocate for this, I know.
Very good.
All right,
Okay.
everyone. Well, remember, you can heal.
We can help.
We can help. Take care, everyone.